Satoru, behave or I'm putting you out, Sayla threatened. He couldn't help but smile at her. You're going to ban me from my own kitchen, little alpha. How do you plan on doing that? He teased. You try to steal more cookie batter than yes, she responded, and I'm going to have Suguru and Kento escort you out and then hold you down once the cookies are finished and force you to watch me eat them all. And no, I won't be sharing. The two mentioned men chuckled from the living room, where one was slipping through the channels and the other was reading. Satoru pouted at her. That's so mean, he whined. She laughed and kissed him before pointing to the other side of the kitchen island. Satoru went around the counter and took a seat on one of the bar stools. He'd be on his best behavior until the sweets were finished. The four had rung in the new year together last night. Sayla had wanted to do a countdown and they lit sparklers on his balcony. After that, they stayed up a few more hours and slept in that morning. Sayla had made them lunch and then decided she wanted something sweet since she hadn't baked in a week, and that was where the cookies came in. The three wanted to have the mating conversation with her before she left them that evening. It was late when they returned from spending the Christmas holiday with their families, and yesterday was the first time they'd been together since then. It wasn't a conversation they wanted to have over the phone. The rest of the visit with their families had been filled with them getting to know one another more, and by the end of the visit, each of their mothers and the twins had exchanged numbers with Sayla, with the older woman making her promise to have lunch together within the next couple of weeks. Satoru watched Sayla add parchment paper to the baking sheet and space rolls of dough apart before she placed the pan into the oven. He stood and went back around the counter to help her clean up and put everything away. What should we have for dinner? Sayla asked as she looked through the refrigerator. You made lunch. Tell us what you want, pretty, and we'll cook, Kento replied. You can surprise me, she answered. They finished cleaning, joining the other two in the living room, and Satoru picked up the sketchbook and pencil on the table. He flipped through to find a blank page when Sayla stopped him. Is that me? She asked, and he flipped back to the page he knew she was talking about and handed her the book. This is beautiful, Satoru. Why haven't I seen it? It was a sketch of her as she'd napped while they were at his family home. He hadn't wanted to tear the drawing out, so he'd brought the entire book back with him. Thank you, baby, and I hadn't really thought about it. Suguru looked over at the drawing. You should see the other one he drew. There's another one, Sayla asked. Satoru nodded. A few of them. Can I see them? Of course, little alpha. He took the sketch pad from her and set it aside. He stood, took her hand, helped her up, and led her down the hall to his studio. He spent the next 10 minutes showing her all the drawings he'd done of her and telling her about the occasions on which he'd drawn them, from the first time he'd seen her to their first date, their first group date, her and her yukata during the fireworks festival, and every other occasion he'd drawn her. The timer went off, and Satoru followed her down the hall. He went into the living room while she went into the kitchen. She joined them a few minutes later with a plate of cookies and napkins. Satoru took a napkin and grabbed one of the still warm cookies. They were soft, and he couldn't wait to bite into it. Now that they were all seated with the snack, he figured it was the perfect time to start the conversation. Little Alpha, we want to talk to you about mating, he said. Okay, what about it, she asked. The three shared a look, but it was Kento who spoke. We've been trying to be patient, but our alphas are pushing, and we like to do it sooner rather than later. But we know this isn't about us, Suguru started. We don't want you to feel rushed just because we're impatient. I think I know what you're feeling. My alpha, Omega, feels the same way, but I knew that might have just been biology, and I wanted to make sure it was something I wanted without its influence, something you wanted without your alpha's influence, she replied. It is something we want without their influence, Satoru responded. I think I can speak for all of us when I say we've wanted to put mating marks on you since you agreed to let us court you, if not before then. Kento and Suguru nodded in agreement, but it was the latter who spoke. Do you feel that way without your Omega's influence? Satoru watched with bated breath for the answer, but regardless of what it was, they wouldn't rush her and would give her as much time as she needed. I do, she replied. I'm ready when the three of you are. The room instantly filled with pleased pheromones and Satoru's alpha rumbled. He was sure his wasn't the only one. While we're on the discussion of mating, I want to point out the elephant in the room, Kento started, our living arrangements. He didn't have to say anything else. Satoru knew he had a point. Their alphas wouldn't want to be away from her for days at a time once they put their marks on her. As it stood, he already hated going their separate ways after spending time with her. It was definitely another thing they needed to discuss. Sayla allowed Kento's words to sink in. She knew it should have been something she thought about, them eventually living together once they were mated, because that was the proper order of things. However, it hadn't crossed her mind. Sure, they didn't have to move in together right away, but she didn't think she would be able to go without being with at least one of them each day. She knew before that happened she needed to speak to Denny. They'd moved there together, and she didn't want him to feel like she was abandoning him. We could live here, Satoru said. That was a possibility. His condo had the most space and enough bedrooms for each of them. Kento and Suguru's homes only had one extra bedroom, and she lived with Denny, and their place was the smallest of the four, so it was off the table. I do like your condo, she said, but I'd like to start fresh somewhere if the three of you are willing, somewhere new for all of us. If it had a yard, that would be nice too. I think that's a good idea, Kento agreed. I don't have an issue with that, Suguru added. Starting fresh together would be nice, Satoru said. Can I? She asked, picking up Satoru's tablet and pen from the table. He nodded, and she opened an app to take notes. I think we should make a list of what we'd want in our shared space and what area would be acceptable to all of us. Is there an area you want to live in, little one? Suguru asked. Not particularly. I work from home, so I don't have to worry about a commute. That would be something the three of you had to consider, and you also know the areas better than I do. So once we've made this list, the three of you can choose an area. I'm okay with there being no yard if there's a park within walking distance. Are you trying to start a garden, little Alpha? Satoru asked. Maybe a small vegetable garden, but it'll be nice to grill or read a book in the yard, and a backyard is great for a child. She paused, realizing what she said, and the pleased pheromones of her alphas filled the room. Backyards are great for a child, Suguru said. They're even better for multiple children. Kento and Satoru hummed in agreement. Sayla filled her cheeks with air before releasing it. We can come back to that discussion after some time. They continued to discuss what they wanted, and after looking at the final list, she wondered if they'd be able to get everything they were looking for. So they then made another shorter list of concessions they were willing to make. What the entire list boiled down to was separate bedrooms for each of them, because regardless of her alphas being able to deal with one another, their rooms would ultimately be their dens, and they would need that space. But she also wanted a room for the four of them. Satoru wanted a space to continue his art. Kento wanted to ensure there was enough space to house all of his books, which was also something Sayla wanted as well. Suguru wanted a workspace, but it wasn't inherently necessary. I think this is a good starting point, Kento said once they finished. Sayla agreed. They hadn't talked numbers, but she was sure the four of them together could afford whatever it was they agreed on when they eventually started looking. I know we've made this list, but before we move forward any more with it, I'd like to speak to Denny first, see how he feels. We moved here together, and I don't think either of us thought we wouldn't live together the entire time we were here. We understand that, and we wouldn't expect you to make this decision without him in mind, Suguru said. Once we mate, we should get your visa changed to a spousal visa, Satoru said, and Sayla raised a brow. Can we do that without us being married, she asked. We can, Kento started. Matings are viewed the same as marriage. They might hold more weight because it's a permanent mark, whereas marriage can end in divorce. Well, ours won't when we tie the knot, Suguru said. Sayla couldn't help but smile at the implication because he basically told her that while they were going to mark her as their mate, they wanted to marry her too. She wasn't sure if the three of them had talked about it before Suguru said it, but the content pheromones in the air told her the other two didn't disagree with him. From the outside looking in, it seemed as if everything was moving fast, but it all felt right. It felt natural, and she wouldn't change it. Speaking of that, when did you want to mate, she asked. They hadn't mentioned it when they brought it up an hour ago. We thought it would be best to do during your next heat cycle, while you were in preheat. We want you to be cognizant, but we also want to cause you the least amount of pain as possible, Kento said. Sayla nodded in agreement. She didn't know when her next heat cycle would be since she only had the one and couldn't track them yet. She knew that usually they happened every 4 months, but she wasn't sure that would be the case with her since she'd been on suppressants for so long. She was excited about mating them and eventually living with them, and if they planned to do it during her next heat cycle, then it could happen within the next couple of months. Denny was working the next couple of nights, but she would have the conversation with him on his next day off. Then she would prepare for Kento's rut.